So welcome back to the channel. If you've been watching me regularly in the last few months, then you know I've been working quite hard with Hack Motion, a device which is measuring the way that the wrist works. And I've found through working with Hack Motion that it's given me a lot of solutions to a lot of the regular problems that you'll be facing every day on the golf course. So in the next couple of weeks, I'll also be kind of in between the Hack Motion videos, actually showing you how you can solve and cure some of the biggest mistakes in amateur golf. And we're going to start with the real biggest. This is probably for everyone, the slice. The slice is produced by moving the club head on an out-to-in path through the ball, which for a right-handed golfer basically means you're swinging the club head to the left of target at the moment of impact. And at the same time, you are opening the club face to that path. So if the club is moving 10 degrees to the left and you have the club face square, then there's a 10-degree difference between the direction that the club head is actually moving and the direction that the club face is pointing. And this will impart a side spin on the golf ball by tilting the ball's spin axis. And this is what we call a slice. So even if the club face is pointing where you want the ball to go, this doesn't mean the ball is actually going to land in the target. In a lot of cases, the amateur golfer will have the club face close to the target, open to the path, and the ball will start for a right-handed golfer to the left of the target and land somewhere in the target. And this is most certainly if you have a slicer's swing and you want to get a golf ball around a golf course, then obviously you're going to have to play with that. I know, however, the majority of you don't want this swing, and the reason for it is obviously that it's very difficult to control it. You are losing an awful lot of energy on the ball because you're opening the club face through impact relative to the target line. You are hitting across the ball, so there's not as much ball speed as you would probably like to have, and it would look a lot prettier if you weren't doing that. So today I really want to kind of have a look at the causes on obviously the solutions to the slice. The first problem really is that you don't want to make a slice, and so an awful lot of golfers out there are actually moving the club too much to the inside in the backswing, trying to get this in to out path by driving the club or pushing the club down the path inside and then trying to pull it back from the inside in the downswing. The problem is that you are not only trying to move the ball in the right direction and impart the correct spin on the golf ball, you're also trying to move it a bit of a distance. And you're not going to be able to do that if you keep the club down here, which means picking it up. Picking the club up in that leg from back there will often cause you to bow your wrist up, going into what we call extension, and open the club face, which are two things which will obviously help the slice, not the hook or the neutral shot. At the same time, allowing your arms here to actually move down towards the ball will probably mean that rather than dropping them here on the inside and coming down the same path as you went back on, you're far more likely to actually start to rotate the club over the top and come even more from the outside. So the very act of trying to avoid your slice is actually causing the slice. Even bigger problem, however, is the lack of rotation in the wrists and lower arms during the backswing and the downswing. And this is something that you are intuitively not allowing to happen. As we take the club back, we should not only be lifting and hinging the wrists, but also rotating the lower arms so that the golf club comes back in what we call plane, getting into the same angle as it had when it was on the ground. This will help the club basically then to drop back and come down into the back of the golf ball rather than hitting it on top of the golf ball by coming over the top and hitting down with a very, very sharp angle of attack. So what we should be doing is taking the club up, lifting it and rotating the wrist so that the club is in plane. Once you've reached the top of the golf swing and the club starts to come down then, rather than holding the club tight and pulling on it, causing it to get steeper again, you want to actually allow the rotation to continue, almost as if the club is going to be pointing back in that direction. You can see from this camera, I'm actually pointing the club almost, like 50, 60 degrees back behind me. So obviously, if I were to swing the club on this path through, it would be going 50 or 60 degrees right of the target for a right-handed golfer. No fear of a slice there then. On the contrary, I'll be hooking it. However, the reason that it's pointing so far behind me is because I've also turned my body away from the target, which is helping me to get the club on the inside. And obviously, to accelerate the club and to get it back on the ball, I'm going to be turning my body back. In truth, the golf swing is always a bit of a yin and a yang. You have certain things in your golf swing which are moving the club behind you, and certain things in your golf club which are going to move the club ahead of you. And getting these things basically to balance one another out is how you get a neutral swing plane. So if I can get 60 or 70 degrees of rotation with the club behind me, I can get 60 or 70 degrees of rotation with my hips, which will get the club back in front of me on a neutral line. Normally, you're going to get around about 45 degrees of hip rotation in the backswing, and if you are really flexible, you probably get 45 degrees of rotation in the follow-through as well. Wouldn't it be great to look like Rory at impact position with 45 degrees of rotation there? In order to do that, however, you have to, with your hips in a neutral position, have the club 45 degrees behind you. And you're not going to do that if you're not allowing the lower arm rotation here. So you see how these things kind of match up. You have got to get the club coming up in front of you and rotating behind you. And as gravity starts to push your arms down, you have to allow it to push the club down and allow this bit at the end, the club head, which is a good deal heavier than the rest of the club, to actually keep falling backwards. And by doing that, you are allowing yourself so much more room to rotate through the ball. In fact, I would say one of the reasons that you aren't rotating your hips through the ball and your shoulders enough is simply because intuitively you feel that the club is moving to the outside anyway, and rotating hips and shoulders would make it even worse. So you're going to be doing something else in order to get the club to come on a halfway neutral path through the ball, which obviously is again making your golf swing very unreliable and costing you distance. So you've got to basically bite into that sour apple and start to allow the golf club to move naturally around your wrists. And this means basically getting this movement going on, lifting and rotating before dropping. The lifting and rotating is happening in the backswing, and to a certain extent a little bit as we start the downswing. The dropping will start around about hip height as we allow the club to come into the back of the ball. If you also allow your wrist to go into a certain amount of flexion here, bending back, you're going to get the club even further behind yourself, and you can see players like John Rahm, Dustin Johnson, even more, who have an awful lot of flexion in their wrist. They got to get an awful lot of rotation in the downswing in order to get it moving down a neutral path. And this is where you can start to see massive relationships between the amount of rotation in the downswing with the amount of rotation in the backswing achieved through your arms and to a certain extent durch the flexion in your lead wrist. And if you can get a handle on that, you have a really good chance of getting rid of this slice for good. So the first drill, as I've just showed you, I want you to just basically hold the club out in front of you, lift it up and rotate it over to the side. If it goes underneath parallel to the ground, it's because you're allowing your upper arm, your lead upper arm to rotate. If you keep the feeling of the elbow pointing down to the ground, then that won't happen. And when it gets down to here, you just relax the wrist, allow the lead wrist to bend back a little bit, go a little bit into flexion and rotate the club back to square. And this is basically a mini golf swing. When we look at that in the swing, I'm intensifying this movement by lifting the club as well, but this kind of rotating seems to vanish when I introduce the rotation of the body, which moves the club on a far more neutral plane back. But you can see how I'm allowing the club to rotate behind me, and as the club drops and my body returns to parallel, the club is still behind me, allowing me to rotate even further with the hips and shoulders before I'm on a neutral position, and therefore releasing the club into the back of the golf ball, making it far, far easier to move the club down the line. When we come to controlling the club phase, you can see here at the top of the swing how the extension, the bending up of the wrist, will open the club face, and the flexion will close the club face. In a neutral golf swing, what's actually happening is you will rotate the club back, losing a lot of the extension in your wrist. You'll get this kind of old flat wrist. And actually at the top of the swing, if you go neutral and passive in your swing, you will actually get a little bit of extension coming back in. This extension will actually remain as you start the downswing. But as the club starts to release out away from you, the wrist will go back into flexion just before impact and release back into extension through impact, although in impact you should have a little bit of flexion in your wrist. The only way you're going to be able to ever measure that is by using this hack motion device, which will actually show you exactly how your wrists are moving in the golf swing. Even with high-speed cameras behind and in front of you, it's going to be very difficult for you to see. And I don't know whether you can read the TrackMan numbers here on the screen, but even a TrackMan can't really tell you why these numbers are in to out to in, negative or positive axis spin on your golf ball, because these are results. They are not the reason. They're not what's producing the result. And getting a better understanding of how your arms and hands work in a golf swing, that's really the key to your success. So altogether, once again, take the club back by lifting it up, hinging your wrists and rotating at the same time. Allow your lower arms to rotate the club onto plane, and when you start the downswing, the rotation should continue. Allow your lead wrist to go into flexion in the downswing before going into extension through release. And as you come back up into the finishing position, you should find the club almost kind of crossing across your head at the top of the backswing when you get through, which is a good position because it means the club has moved naturally through the golf ball on a neutral plane. If you get yourself moving too much in to out, you're going to be over here. If you get yourself going too much out to in, you're going to be coming around here somewhere. And in a lot of cases, you will actually find when you're moving out to in, there'll be virtually no rotation in your hips through the golf ball, because simply it's not possible to hit the golf ball in any way sufficiently with hip rotation if you're doing that. Maybe the last word as far as avoiding the slice, because obviously it's not just your arms and hands which are doing this, is basically making sure from the top of the golf swing that your body goes into a passive movement to start the downswing. Don't get too active too quickly with your hips and your shoulders when you start the downswing, because that will also move the club to the outside. Try and get the feeling that as your club changes direction and starts to fall, that you really just relax your body using the tension in your body and allowing it to return of its own volition in its own time back to the starting position. If you get your club far enough behind you, almost moving to a position that by the time that the hips are actually, or the club is at waist height, your hips are actually slightly open to the target, and then it's going to be far easier to accelerate the club through the ball. I know this was quite a long and quite a complicated video today, but I hope that that helps you better understand where the slice comes and how to avoid one in the future. If it has, and if you liked it, please hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done already. If you'd like to support the channel further, you could become a patron to the channel. I have a Patreon site. There's a link below, and a big thank you to everybody who's become a patron and supported me this season. I'll be back with the next one very shortly. Until then, goodbye.